One of the functions of the state, the government, is to limit evil, to punish the evildoers. But what do you do if the representatives of the government are promoting evil and are limiting good? So how do we respond to the actions of the government if they're not acting in goodwill? What shall we do as Christians? Shall we act, or should we be quiet? I'm Vasyl Ostry, and I have Igor Plohoy with me. He is the leader of NGO chaplaincy in the military. Then we have Vitaly, Gren, who is a member of National Election Commission, and also we have Andriy Gnidets from Lviv, a lawyer. Welcome, Andriy. Greetings. So, dear participants, dear members of our online discussion, it's evident that we have certain stress in relationship between the government and the church. And relationship, someone said, between the government and the church are beneficial for the government but harmful for the church. So how this relationship with the government can be hurtful for the church? Igor? Well, first of all, if we look at the history of relations between the government and the church, we can see it begins with a conflict, in fact. As soon as the church begins, we have conflict between the church and the government. From the day of Pentecost, we have this conflict between the church and Synedrion, because it was 50-50 political and religious body. Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great, was not in power anymore, and all the powers were transferred to Synedrion, and there is conflict between Synedrion and the church. And we can see how the conflict moves from Synedrion, the church, to Roman Empire and the church were in conflict until the time of Emperor Constantine. Until that time, the church was in opposition, in conflict with the government. Then we can look at Middle Ages, and then we can see Reformation, and the relationship between the government and the church, they deteriorate. If you look at Russia Revolution in 1917, or in Mexico in 1917, the priests were shot to death. So 20th century, and that was true for Ukraine as well, 20th century is full of contradictions. And of course there is a good model of dialogue between the church and the government, and until recently this model was in the United States. They were able to build a society where there is mutual respect, and the role of the church is quite significant in modern society. But why relations deteriorate? Because in my opinion, these relations do deteriorate. The society becomes more secularized, and church is pushed out to the margin and beyond. And it's the fault of the church, in my opinion. I think this program today can demonstrate the challenges and solutions. Chesterton said that relations of the church and the government would benefit the state and would hurt the church, but it depends on what relations we are talking about, like Sergianic relationship, when the church bows to the government and serves the government, like in Russia. The church blesses the government, but church does not have this prophetic voice when the government does evil. If the church is supporting the government, is like a crutch for the government, that hurts the church and hurts the government. Thank you for your response, Igor. Do you have theological education? I have graduated from theological seminary. So, dear participants, I'd like to say that all participants of our discussion are either getting their degree. Vitaly is in his third year of master's program, or some of us already have this degree. What does Bible talk about Christians in politics? Well, Bible does not talk much about that. Bible gives other functions to Christians. So the closest text about relations with the government is Romans chapter 13, and you can read from 1 to 8. But you need to look at this text from the position of previous chapters in this letter to Romans, because Apostle Paul starts with our relationship with Christ and our attitude to Christianity and how we build ourselves spiritually. And then the next step is to understand how we live in this society, how we relate to each other, and how we relate to the government. I'd like to add to what Igor said. He has gone through the church history in very short time, but there was an interesting period in our time. That was Reformation period, when the church Luther tried to make this parallel existence of the church and government. And he developed this doctrine from Romans, especially chapter 13, and then statement from Apostle Peter that we need to be subordinate to all government, including the emperor's government, as was in time when Peter wrote it. But also the church is the government of God on earth, and this existence is in parallel. But Igor already mentioned the secularization of society, because we have this individualism in human development. After Reformation, we see development of humanism, and this individual humanism causes conflict between individual and the Church of Christ. These are two conflicts that would remain. There is no conflict between government and the church, because there is a person at the head of the state, and this person tries to dictate or explain what the church should do, and that's how they build the government. Or there is a story from the gospel that we need to subordinate ourself to Christ. There's an interesting book, The Conflict of Kingdoms, by Charles Colson, who was part of Watergate scandal, and as he was in prison for it, he tried to reassess his life. He accepted Christ when he was in prison. He wrote this book, and he wrote this line where government always tried to subordinate the church, and how church rejected this submission. And there is also ideology of rejection, when you can see biblical ideas turn secular, and there is revolt, there is revolution. You can see that happening in South America, but also we can see Hitler trying to subordinate the church. We could see the opposition of the church to the government in Soviet times, and how government tried to subordinate the churches through re-registration. Last year there was an exhibition about dissidents in Kiev, and there was exhibition at Maidan, and Grigory Vins was one of those. He was trying for the rights of the church to have these meetings of the church free from the government influence. Thank you for these significant responses. Vitaly said that Bible does not say much about election. He's member of Central Election Commission, but I like to add that in Romans 16 there is a statement in last verses. Apostle Paul says, "One brother greets everyone, and he is the treasurer of the city." We know a lot about gospel events thanks to archaeology development of the end of 20th century, and they found this plaque. He was minister of finance of city. So Erastus was a Christian, and he went for the election, and he won the election, and he became municipal minister of finance. So this was elected position. He participated in election. He won in the election, and there is a plaque that says that citizens of Corinth are thankful. That was the title on the plaque, that citizens are thankful to Erastus for his work. In October, we'll have Ukrainian local elections. And second detail, I forgot while I spoke about the first one. I can give 2 counter arguments to make it more fun. Okay, thank you, but then we'll listen to Andriy talking about the letter to Romans. The last 2 chapters are very unclear in textology of New Testament, and so there is a possibility that they were added later when Bible was compiled, but there is no direct statement that go and be elected and take government positions. Well, there are many things that are not mentioned in the Bible, like be a tractor driver or do other profession. And so we need to be good Christians. We need to be sanctified in whatever we do, but we should be part of Great Commission. But we'll talk about this some time later after Andriy speaks. And that allows us to understand the text better, because there were some people who held very significant positions. But actually, that was an interesting thing for me. I just heard, and I'd like to study it in more detail about Erastus. Andriy, tell us, please. Igor and Vitaly talked about historic perspective, but today, what are the stresses in relationship between the church and the government? We can talk about modernity of Ukraine, in your opinion. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy that there are so many people who are interested to know about civic position of a Christian. I'd like to share some thoughts. Of course, my brothers already have shared their position, but the church was always about influence. Church is an influential institution that existed for 2,000 years and has many millions of followers. So leaders of any government wanted to subordinate that influence. So the church also saw some possibility of influencing the rest of the people through the government. We can see that with Emperor Constantine, and we can see it in Ukraine, that before elections, some politicians try to take on board their local priests to participate in elections or to participate in some local events, because any politician understands that if the church supports them, then the priest would support them, then all the church would support them. And for the church, the benefit is if this politician comes into government, then the politician would facilitate certain decisions beneficial for the church. Say, provide with land or solve some problems with real estate. So there was always conflict between the church and the government. And this separation of church and state is not dictated by a conflict, by desire to separate the competency of the church and the government, to prevent interference from the government into life of the church, but also for the church not to dictate politicians what decisions they need to make. But then it still means that the church should influence society. The churches stand for certain things in society. There is a call in the gospel to be the light of the world, to be the salt of the earth. So we need to be salt, not just in the church building, but in any part of our social life, government, medicine, politics, anything, everything. The church should be the light. Andriy, thank you. Tell us, please, what are the stressful areas in relationship between the church and the government in Ukraine today in 21st century? What shall we talk about? There are actually many such areas because there is a fight of different ideologies, different views, and these ideologies could be different from the belief of the church. Let's talk about family. Bible has very clear understanding what marriage and family is all about, but there are some liberal movements in society that have a different view. Or the matter of corruption. It's very much condemned in the Bible. There are many verses that condemn corruption, but there is very high level of corruption in the government. And there are many other issues where the church and the government would have different positions. Thank you very much. Dear friends, please tell us, can there be a good Christian but still irresponsible citizen? I formulate the question in such a way, and the topic is formulated to make our discussion more acute, because we're talking about citizen or Christian as if these would be different people. But again, can a person be good Christian but irresponsible citizen?
Actually, this is what I mentioned about before. Especially if we look at Romans, it's impossible to be irresponsible. But there can be a difference here because person, first of all, is going through different periods in life, periods of transformations, and you can't just click with your fingers and then sanctify in a minute. I know this question can be very interesting because we can mention taxes and other things. Of course, a good Christian is the person who lives in society. He's not harmful to other citizens. He doesn't violate laws, and he tries to find the compromises and not to bother others and not to bother and hurt himself. But it never happens like that, because we see many confirmations where the sinful human nature is being shown in many different cases. And we can talk not only about taxes or exceeding speed limits, but it's the absence of kind attitude towards the neighbor. And sometimes such attitude can be very often shown among Christians. This is the culture that we all lack. So it's a constant fight between the flesh and the spiritual body, and this is something we all need to work on. And it's not something we will overcome within one day. I was asked very often, how can you be a good citizen in the country? And the list is not to violate laws, because as Romans says, they carry the sword, and fulfill all commitments that state requires from you. Of course, if there is a violation of the rights and constitution or international acts really prove them. These can be actions. These can be actions of civil resistance. It's a delicate issue. It can be pretension case, writing letters, petitions, writing different applications, stating the civic position. But primarily, we need to understand why this is happening in your life. If you think that you're a Christian man and you don't live according to those rules that you have in the state, understanding that all powers come from God, maybe then that person faces serious issues in relationships with God, and he doesn't want to really live a true Christian life. You have mentioned about the methods of resistance, appealing processes, if there are certain illegal acts from the state of the government. Igor, does church need to resist the government, and in what cases it should do it? Let me briefly answer the previous question. Can the Christian be a bad citizen? No. A person who belongs to sect can be an irresponsible citizen, but a good Christian man, it's a different person. What's the definition of Christian? If the person reads Bible, and in Hebrews chapter 11, we see, starting with verse 32, I'm sure that people can read this verse. We won't read it now, but it's very easy. It says that those who believe, they create righteous acts, and they are just, and they are being strengthened in the war, and it goes on and on. This is the position. It's an active civil position. It's the part of the path of faith, and if we say that the path of faith, the final destination is heavens, then the path to these heavens goes through different trials. We need to act in a certain way in different situations, including conflicts, civil conflicts during war, what chaplains can do. So it's a part of our life, part of our faith. I'm talking a little bit radically right now, but can Christian resist to the government if his rights are being violated? What does the Word of God say? It says, I will say it should be so. Because we read scriptures and we see how Jesus Christ acts, how Apostle Paul, Apostle Peter, Apostle John, how they act. They have certain behavior. Apostle John and Apostle Paul, this is the 4th and 5th chapter of Acts. They are not submissive to the government. They are disobedient because government says, don't preach the gospel. They continue to preach the gospel. In 16th chapter of Acts, in the city of Philippi, Apostle Paul goes to preach the gospel there. And as soon as he goes into Europe, Apostle Paul starts with evangelism, but it ends with the riot action. You can read this chapter at home, because Apostle Paul was put to jail, and then they secretly started releasing him. And Apostle Paul says, I'm not going to obey. Okay, I protest. And my protest in this action is that I'm not coming out of this jail. I expect officials to come to this jail because I want to give to the officials, I want to give them my requirements, my pretensions, that they live, they act illegally, and they violate my rights. So he puts things in place. So Apostle Paul, not just like modern Christians say very often, oh, praise God, I'm free now. Now you understood that I am innocent. No, he said, there was the act of a legal act that was committed. He had a conflict with the priest Ananias, and he had put him to place. He said, "You are illegal, you are not just. God has put you to judge, but you are working against the law." So Apostle Paul, he always resisted illegal acts of the government, of Synhedrion and Roman government. So we can talk a lot about that, but coming out of Christian principles, and as we look at chapter 13 in Romans, how can one person, the same Apostle Paul in 16th chapter of Acts, he can resist the government, but then later he will say, "Be submissive to every government." Why this is happening? Because in 13th chapter it says that you not only should be submissive to the government, but in first 4 verses it says what are the functions of the government. The government should encourage those who do the good things, and government should punish those who do evil. If the government accomplishes and fulfills all these functions that are right, then we should be submissive to such government. If government is not orderly, is not like that, if government forbids to preach the gospel, it's a very thin ice over there, and there could be cracks in the ice. But I say yes, we see examples when Christians were not silent, but they were protesting. And we're analyzing the period of church, and we say, oh, first apostle church, they were blessed. Let's look at their period. Did they resist the government? Yes, they did. And they documented their protest in documents. We write apologets of that time. They were defending the faith, and they were writing letters to emperor, and they were writing to politicians, and they said, "You're wrong. You are persecuting Christians." So they were not silent. They had a proactive position. Sometimes they were heard, sometimes they were not heard. And it all lasted until the 4th century. All apologets, they were entering into dispute. Some of them were punished. They were murdered and killed, but they were saying directly. Christians were not afraid to become martyrs. We cannot be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid to die. We should not be silent. First Christians were not like that. Apostles were not like that, and we shouldn't be the same. Thank you, dear friends, for watching us right now on YouTube. We see 67 people who are watching us, and some of you already wrote comments. I already see conversations. So you are commenting and discussing some of these issues. You like the topic. I see that. It's an acute topic, and if you don't mind, I will read some comments. Somebody is bringing greetings from Czech Republic. Thank you. Welcome. Mykola says that, can you please explain what the Central Election Commission is all about? But we already did that. Shekhovtsov is commenting, citizen can be Christian or cannot be a Christian, but the Christian should be a good citizen. That's a good definition. What else? Just a second. Somebody is thanking us. Vera Korobka, thank you for this important topic. Thank you for discussion. Thank you for the comments. Christians who encourage the development of the state, when it promotes the development of the society and every Christian person, this is the realization of the mission that we all have in life. But my question is For a Christian man, important principle: should we be more obedient to God? Where is the border? Where is the boundary between the principle? Actually, let me suggest that Andrei could comment more about that, because he worked at the prosecutor's office and he worked on the reform in that sphere. Maybe he can comment this question. Andrei, where is the line between the principle that actually, I support the thought that Christian men should fulfill absolutely all laws of the government, besides those that contradict the law of God in Bible. For me, this is where the line goes. If there is a law of the state that contradicts the Bible, law of God, then we should not fulfill. This is the line that we should not cross. Thank you, Andrei. Are you finished with your answer? Yes. Excellent. Thank you for the short answer. I was just reading the chat and I see that Vera did not receive the answer from for her question. I will read it again. Should finances be taxed, the tithings that are brought to the church? And hear what people comment. No, they should not, because people who come to church, they already paid the taxes from the salary, and they've already made the offerings to the church. It's wrong to pay taxes from the offerings. Church is the religious community, and no, taxes should not be paid from the offerings. Actually, a state is regulating this issue, and laws say that actually religious organizations and churches, they have other preferences in accounting, in financing, in usage, in distribution of the funds, because church is fulfilling the mission to really distribute these funds among poor members of the church. And these are preferences, but the only thing that I would comment in the church, what is the goal? What are our intentions? Why are we are bringing offerings to church? Are we doing it to calm down our consciousness, or what is our Christianity all about? When we know that church is managing finances well, we trust the leadership that they're doing a good job, we trust them, but it's a very delicate issue, because if each person who comes to church, he is the participant, he has the right to know, to be aware how the funds are being distributed, because this is how God's love is being shared through funds as well. Okay, petitions as the tool of civil active position. What is petition? Why do we have to sign them? Actually, we started, this topic was born through my conversation with Vitaly about petition. This is my experience. I'm trying to sign petitions, different Christian publics and non-Christian publics. I'm trying to be active in my position. So here's my experience. One of the petitions that I wanted to sign, I open it. Of course, I had to set aside the time to do it. I open it and I see serious grammar mistakes. And I have no idea who made this petition. Of course, I didn't sign it. Well, there should be the name of this author. Well, I don't know. It was unknown. It was in the Christian public. And I remember the sentence there, if you don't sign it, it will all go bad. And one of my classmates, she sent me this petition, international petition. It was about deforestation. And I asked, is it an international petition? Petition to who? Who should react? President of Russian Federation? He doesn't react to international sanctions and scandals. So let's start from the beginning. This is my negative experience facing petitions. What is petition? Why do we need it? Do we need to sign it? I will tell you. I will tell you general aspects of petitions. As we have already talked about Christian position, if we see some illegal acts of the government, of the state, and they contradict with our Christian consciousness, it's worth stating, because we're talking now about protests and riots. There is a certain sequence. There is a hierarchy of actions. First, we start with polemics. First, early Christians, they wrote letter to the emperor, just like it was a long time ago. If those letters don't work, then we do actions of protest. Or we do riots, we block the roads, we block the building of administration of the president. So we have the right to show our position. So in order for us to be clean before God in our consciousness, we need to do step by step. If you have studied the theory of the just war that theologians have studied long time ago, and Thomas Aquini had introduced, so there are steps. At first we do first step, second, third, fourth. If the fourth step doesn't work, then we go to the fifth step. If the fifth step doesn't work, then we go to the sixth step. So in our society there is a polemics. Some people say, why do we need these petitions? They mean nothing. Listen to me. Let's sign it at first, and if they won't mean anything, then we will go to the step number 2. If second step won't work, we'll go to step number 3. So petition is the step number 1 to state that this is what people need to hear. 25,000 people signed petitions, and the civil opinion is being formed. Politicians heard it, MPs heard about position, and Parliament heard it, and officials heard it. If it didn't work, then we go to the second step. So I always call up to the people.
We need to follow Christian principles and civilian action, but then we need to bring the petition together. We need to sign it. Of course, Vitaly will tell us how to compile it properly, but then we need to do it easily. It's 5-10 minutes. It's easier than to go to Kiev and have a protest, but will work with protest if a petition would not work. I like this meeting and different opinions. I think Andriy will have a third view. He comes from Lviv, and there are always correct opinions there. I support neutral actions, not as radical as Igor described. I see that petitions need to be signed. This is collective address to a certain institution, the president or the cabinet of ministers, on certain matters. As I analyzed many petitions that were prepared, I asked a question: what's the purpose of writing this petition? And many people initiate this kind of activity. It's not hard to sign. 25,000 people need to do that, but still the author is not trying to change anything. They just try to become popular. Of course, 25,000 people will sign, but other people will not sign but read it. So they have this kind of support of several hundred thousand. I spoke to a person just recently because it was petition to the president to change something he had no power to change. What's the purpose of this petition? You address the president only if he has power to make this kind of action within his authority. You cannot make a petition that would force cabinet or parliament or president into unnatural action. Well, the response was they're all interrelated, so let them discuss and change things as necessary. But we could not use the principle of machine gun here. It has to be a sniper shot. You don't throw things everywhere to see if someone picks them up. Otherwise, at some point they will stop listening to us, like that boy who cried wolf. So we learn the powers of certain government official, like the president, and his action can change situation. I see the problem. It can be resolved. I don't look for my own popularity. I want to support the right of the church or a person, because the church should serve as guarantor of justice. And then we can start these actions of submission or revolt. If this is a smart petition, and also, even without legal opinion, there can be a moral opinion that would raise the notion in society. The majority of petitions are rejected for the reason that it's not addressed to the proper authority. Like everybody signed petition to save the forests of Siberia, but Putin does not follow any instructions, or some people are preparing petitions before the law is passed to cancel that law, to try to save the problem. There was even a story in the church history when certain translation was made of the Bible just ahead of the Spanish translation, and then it had to be corrected many times, but at least they tried first. So let's raise the problem, let's discuss it, let's use the right resource to address the right person, and we want certain results to be achieved, and only then we start the process. Sometimes people start sharing the petition in different news groups just to reach 25,000, but they have not studied if it's proper thing to do or not. So petition is an instrument for certain officials to hear people's ideas. Actions are not following most times. It's a dress of citizens that are identified and that support the idea. And then government authority works within its power. And government institution, if they don't work according to their mandate, they would be prosecuted sooner or later. So, about petition. Just recently at the website Sabor, there was a petition, there was information, or maybe this is today's news, that petition to recall Draft Law 3316, authored by Sergei Hula, that institutes criminal punishment for criticism of LGBT, reached the necessary number of votes to support. So there is a petition that was signed by people. They raised certain voices and brought them together. This is news that I got. Here's an example of a petition. So people gathered so many votes to support the petition. Thank you for your question. Vitaly explained already legal matters in development of a petition, but talking about this petition is the following. According to the law, the President needs to review this petition. He doesn't have to make this decision. He might support it or not, but at least he needs to respond. Formally, petition does not oblige government authority to do anything to follow, say, demands of the petition. But I'd like to underline another aspect about the value of those petitions. Petition demonstrates to the government authority that they have certain problem that resonates with society. And if there is a problem in society and it reaches first a petition and then 25,000 supporters, that means for the government that at least 25,000 people in society have this painful issue. And so any political government, any political party is interested in their rating, and so they would think a lot before they ignore. But petition is a very responsible instrument, like Vitaly said. Some Christians or some churches raise petitions, and thus they enter public space. The text of the petition is read by the government authority and by an unlimited number of people. So we need to be very serious to describe the arguments of this petition. What does it call for? Is it within powers and mandate of authority that would receive it? For us as Christians, as I see, we have a problem with that. Just like last year, there was a petition at the website of the president that creation theory should be taught in schools. I support this idea altogether, but this petition has no scientific argument why the creation theory should be taught in schools. There was quoting of the Bible, there was issue of morality and choice, but this petition of a scientific nature had no scientific arguments. So a person who is not biased against religion would doubt whether this petition should be supported. I had those examples as well. When you read a text of the petition and it seems they have good idea, they have good invitation, but arguments and facts are not present. Statistics are not demonstrated. In the West, this instrument of petition is very serious. There are analytical centers to prepare research, arguments, and facts that could later become a text of petition. And when it's submitted, it has statistics, it has results of research, and it's able to convince even non-religious person about making certain decision. We can say that in Ukraine we don't have analytical centers that are able to do that, but as Christians we have our scientists, we have our lawyers and economists, and I see that preparation of each petition should be made in better quality. But the fact that we submit these low-quality petitions could bring the reverse result. We don't improve ideas in society, we discredit certain ideas. If a petition comes from a group of Christians, but they don't have arguments from the science, instead they have spelling mistakes. That causes everybody to think about Christians as illiterate people. So this instrument should be used very carefully. Thank you very much, Andriy. I'd like to read from the chat, from YouTube. So I'd like from you a brief response, brief answers. Why churches excommunicate people for um, um, for betraying their wife or husband, for idolatry, but adultery, but not for corruption. Can I respond to that one? I'll give an example. I read a book by a blog of Greek Catholic priest from Lviv region, maybe from Sakal, but it doesn't matter. I'm not sure. Interesting blog. My parishioners did not confess to certain things. I'm a priest. I will not tell you what they confess to, but what they don't confess to, I'll tell you. I am a priest in a small town. Everybody knows me, and I know everyone. I know the chief of police and chief doctor. And when I come to the forest, there is a lot of garbage, and no one confessed to throwing garbage. There is garbage, no confession. I have not heard about bribes to doctors or police officers, but they are members of my parish. So philosophical question is, and that could be also the fault of the priest. People confess to what they believe to be sin, and they believe to be sin only about things that are presented as sin from the pulpit. When we bring practical gospel to the people, I leave the church, I get in the car, or I walk 2 blocks. I need to know what must be done. So if the church preaches against corruption and bribe, then they will confess about bribery and corruption. What do we preach about? Heaven we go to, but we don't explain the path to that heaven, where we stumble and fall on the way to heaven. We don't talk about that. We don't have these practical, specific, applicable sermons. Well, we have, but not enough. That's a problem of our Ukrainian theology, Protestant, Greek Catholic. This is a problem. We don't talk much. Thank you for this meeting, for this broadcast, that we start talking about this, because it has to be preached. It has to be discussed by Christians as practical Christian life. If we don't have understanding of sin, then there is no confession. There is no repentance of corruption. Okay, this is a question to pastors and preachers. Do you have a response? I support this idea that very little is spoken about that, but there are some specific issues. In society, there are problems of assigning blame. And it's not just in Ukraine, it happens throughout the world. We see a person, myself, separated from somebody else. And I am not that best. I pay taxes, and they're corruption here. I try to demonstrate myself as being better than everybody else. And I've read some stories when someone is trying to talk about corruption, and they accuse somebody else, and then somebody else finds even worse corruption here. So the church is not investigative authority to investigate the corruptioners. Okay, we blame whom? We blame corruptioners, but they're somewhere there. We read about corruption in social networks or hear from rumors, but then the church is not investigative authority. The church cannot investigate who received a bribe, how much, and whether it was filmed. So if a person that is giving or getting bribe, they know their problem, they understand, and they understand that there is a problem of sin, that they take this bribe for whatever reason. Then they understand that they cannot fight it themselves. They don't have enough power, and they need support. Then there is a problem. Do they trust their church? Maybe they're just visiting church. They're coming because they want to get some kind of comfort and peace. I came to church, so this would be balancing out my sin with my good works. We know that these people in society are called corruptioneers, but there is no complete criminal case. You don't see criminal investigation and decision by the court. The church cannot investigate, it's not its authority. But if the fact is proven, I would review this question in the church. That's a necessary question. We cannot support sins of somebody's flesh. Sin is sin. So these questions should be discussed and reviewed in the church. Let's move to the next question, maybe. Because, just a moment, I'll give you an opportunity to conclude. We talk about ways of fighting evil that happens in the government, in authority, but we also talk about personal faith, personal Christianity. So what would you like to? I'd like to add to what Vitaly said. You're saying why you don't have repentance, not just repentance, excommunication. Person who does evil is not discussed by the church judgment. Okay, I started as a lawyer here. So we said that one way of fighting evil is preparing and signing petition to demonstrate our opinion to society. The next would be protest. Peaceful protest without rioting. So the next opportunity is protesting. Can Christian protest against the government? Of course, yes, we've heard this from our discussion. But what are permitted framework of protesting? What's allowed in the protest?
I think, again, this is a very important question, and we as Ukrainian Christians, we face this question of participation in revolution, in protection of the state. They talked about this in many other countries of the world. They wrote many books about this issue, but we're just entering into this discussion, into this topic. But there is a sequence of steps that I've mentioned before, and if we talk briefly about it, the reaction of the Christian should have an adequate character. Step by step, very simple. If we talk about protest in a sign of manifestation, just a peaceful meeting near the parliament, a couple of thousands of Christians came out to the building, and many Christians had a meeting, had a protest against introduction of LGBT ideology in schools. And what if police will come and they will start shooting into all the protesters, and we are just modeling the situation? I think that we must, through our protest action, we should be more focused on reaction. We are reacting towards illegal acts of the government, and we are not producing illegal acts by ourselves. So if riot police is coming to protesters and starts shooting and starts attacking, then we should take actions to protect ourselves. So there should be a reaction. Briefly, this is my answer. I will comment as well on this question. In any way, the freedom of peaceful meetings is all actually in the Constitution, and we should understand this is the peaceful meeting. We should be very careful in interpreting these peaceful meetings, because we don't want to be the ones who are destroying the power and the government. And this is what Apostle Paul wrote about in Bible. Christians should understand their role. There should be submission to the government, and they are not questioning the legitimacy of the government because, no, actually, Peter doesn't specify the details, and he says you should be submissive to every government. So where is that line between where this meeting is peaceful protest, or it's not a peaceful protest? Because God is against anarchy. God is God of order. And even in Christian understanding, maybe some people are joking and they say, oh, we are anarchists. But this is wrong. God created government as an institution, and God has determined government to take care of society, of the country. God created rules and laws, and in the system it should work very right. But when the person starts destroying these institutions, this is not the correct Christian approach. So it's a very delicate question. Where does this line go between peaceful protest and non-peaceful protest? I don't like when there is a hatred during these protests. Christians cannot produce hatred if they use bad language, or they have hatred attitude, or they put bad names on president or MPs. No, the sense of peaceful protest is to show that we don't agree with the position of government. But what's the constructive part of this protest? Very often they come out with the banner, "We are against," and this or that, and then representative of the president's office come out and they say, okay, suggest to us what is your way of solution. Tell us, how can we write this in the documents? Please suggest a bill, suggest a petition if it's all properly concluded. Come to a meeting with me, with the MP, and we'll discuss. Very often they don't have answers to those representatives of the government. It's better, easier for them to say, all are bad, I am right. It's not a systematic approach. There should be a sequence of steps. And you cannot just come out because you have a mood to do it with no suggestions. This is just an act of arrogance, as for me. Actually, in peaceful protests, I think Christians understand this, because all Christians that I saw as they were coming out, they had listed all the requirements and all their suggestions. I remember there was, in 2004, there was an Orange Revolution, and in Odessa we came out to the building of administration, and the representative of government came up to us and he said, okay, let's discuss. What are your requirements? Give your document to us. And we stand there, and we had nothing to give to him. It was many years ago, 16 years ago. But we should be prepared if we go and we participate in protests like that. Actually, we in 931 in the project, we told them not to bring not to allow this bill to be adopted because it's against the ideology of Christians. Thank you. Andrei, are you with us? Can you tell us, besides, you are a lawyer, you write laws, you're also a minister in the church, you preach in the church, and you were a part of youth ministry in the past. And young people from the church, Christians, who often come to you for advice, did they ever ask you, can we participate in protests? People from Lviv, from Kiev, did they ever ask you if this would be right to participate? What is your personal position about that? Yes, we had many questions like that, especially during the Revolution of Dignity. Young people here in the Church of Transfiguration, they said, we are young people, we want to be active, we want to have active position, can we join the protest? And I remember we did one youth meeting, and we have completely dedicated that meeting to this topic, and we try to explain and interpret how much this is a biblical position. I also agree with brothers that the protest should be a legal one. I just want to tell you that protest, it is a biblical approach. We see John the Baptist, who saw illegal acts of Herod, and he didn't stay away. He didn't say, I don't belong to politics. No, he went and he expressed his protest. And as we know, he even paid the price. He sacrificed his life for the truth that he has voiced out. So Christian man should take an example. We should be brave and courage. Why protest is important from the standpoint of the government? If we look at Parliament, for instance, in Parliament there is a bill. It has, for instance, an anti-Christian position. Why church should go outside and should show its physical presence? Some people think that we should pray, we should rely on God, but to go out, this is wrong. It's not for us. But hope and trust in God, it doesn't mean we should be passive. To pray, this is good, but this is visible only for the church, for the politician, for the MP who works in Parliament. He doesn't see the church that is just praying there. And when we tell them that there is a bill, and the church is praying against this bill, for him this means nothing. But if there is a bill and this MP is being told, you know what, near the building of the Congress there are thousands of people, thousands of Christians, and they said that they will not leave this square until you cancel the bill. And politicians who care about their rating, they will not risk. I guarantee this to you. He will not ignore the interests of this group of people because he sees concrete people. He sees that they have their physical presence and they show that they're not indifferent, and this problem is very acute to them. Thank you very much. There is a question. We know that around peaceful protests or other riots, there are many manipulations. There is even a biblical example in Athens, in Acts, when one man revolted along with with people of his profession near the temple of Artemida. They gathered, and for 2 or 3 hours they were protesting. They didn't even know why they gathered together. So they just were screaming and yelling, and they had no understanding what is happening. So we know that in some protests, some politicians have their own interests. So how can we as Christians be careful and not get into those problems? Actually, Bible warns us that we should have smart position. We should be wise in, and we need to understand whose interests we are protecting. We should be wise about doing this. What's the goal? Okay, so how can we be careful? How can we be wise? Well, manipulations can be very different. I enter the group in Europe that researches the formation of legal acts in fighting against fakes, manipulations that occur in social media. Actually, at the end of May, I'll have a meeting on this topic. I will tell you, it's an endless topic because there are many algorithms that are, and there's an intellect that blocks these manipulations. But with every day, human mind creates new scripts, new fakes, new programs. So to tell you, it's impossible to give you concrete examples because main thing is that Christians should never be against destruction of the government. Our constitution, actually, from the standpoint of Bonhoeffer, I know it's a very interesting thing because it's a delicate issue, and someone might oppose this idea, but Christians should not try to withdraw government, to destroy government, because there is a special order that God has planned. Actually, in Ukraine, there is a law being made about referendum, and in the future, maybe there'll be a civil initiative and there'll be special government offices, and they will try to make polls. They'll try to ask many citizens about what they think about this issue or that issue. It will be wonderful if it will be introduced. I hope this bill will be adopted and we will have a law about referendum. Okay, let's go back to the question. Speaking about chaotic protests, I think Christian actions should never be chaotic. They should be determined and structured very properly. I remember on the 22nd of June, there was an action near the Cabinet of Ministries, and there were manipulative mass media. There was a central TV channel that came up and asked many questions, and they tried to portray Christians in a bad world, in a bad light, as if Christians are dumb and didn't understand what is happening. But what is different between Christians and between Christians of this time and Christians of that time? We have NGOs and NGOs that are working on Christian principles. If we take part in peaceful protests, if Christians together with church leaders, they came out with heads of Christian organizations, they need to work together with participants of the protest. We should all know why we stand, who is giving out interview, who has press release for journalists, who is in charge of negotiations. Because there are citizens who just want to be a part of this action. Okay, what's the goal? What's the problem that we are trying to portray? And what we want to achieve, what we are going to do. This is the work. I think the church has a huge potential on which we can organize people to go into peaceful protest, and we can work with them. Because everything should be done as if it's done for the Lord. That's what Apostle Paul says. And peaceful protest should be organized orderly and in a proper way as well. Right now we're talking about resisting the illegal acts of government. We were talking about petitions as one of the tools that Christians can use. We were talking about peaceful protests. We talked about why it's important to take part in these protests. And dear friends, I want to read some of the questions that you have sent to us. By the way, we have already spent 1 hour and 20 minutes in our discussion, and there are actually many questions here, not even by this topic. Andrei said, what about journalists' investigations in Ukraine? Unfortunately, it's impossible to rely on court decisions. I will ask Andrei to comment this question. Actually, this is a very clear question. We need alternative means through which we will clarify the truth, and journalists' investigations, they play a very important role right after official version. So I actually support journalists' investigations, a very positive attitude. If Christians are journalists, I want to encourage Christian journalists to be there in the front line. Because if someone comes out to go to the court cases, actually through my ministry, I don't see many Christians there in the chaplaincy ministry. I know you have to be a good professional journalist to do a good job, but I only support them, so you're doing a good job. Okay. Journalists' investigations, they don't substitute the function of the state in the legislative, executive, and in the judicial branch. Believe me, an advocate will have his own vision, and he will try to justify his client. And of course, journalists have their own tasks. And especially if they're not just reposting different fakes, but they're having their own task to investigate. There was one pastor, he's Ivan Demyanenko. There was a criminal case open against him. The pastor was put to prison. I think it was wrong. Just because he was trying to take care of orphans, they decided to put on him, to accuse him in child trafficking. And if it was not a mass media, it was not a journalist's investigations, if it was not 500 people who came to the appeal court and many, many more other things, then this judicial branch would have made the decision that would be profitable to the prosecutor's office, and the person would be in prison until now, and we would still pray for him, and we would bring food to him to prison. So actually, journalists' investigations, there were many applications written, many video blogs, many protests made, and it all brought a good results. Actually, yes, this person stayed in prison for some time, but then he was totally free. They let him go. Andrei asked a question, but the answer is we should engage many different methods, many different approaches. We should be active in our position to help at least someone, at least in certain situations. Of course, we cannot solve all of them. A question for Vitaly. Please try to be short. I know it's a brand new topic, but the person is asking, do you support the right of Christians to own weapons and arms at home?
Well, what do you think about free ownership of handguns? Well, I own some weapons. Any person who holds a weapon is responsible. Person can be killed with a hammer or a baseball bat. So this is wrong attitude to keep weapons away from people. Actually, in American statistics, you have more mistakes in weapon use by police than by people who own it. But you cannot just switch things from all denial to all permission. You have to develop a culture of owning and caring for weapons, and we don't have this law on weapons. We have secondary legislation by Ministry of Interior. And in criminal code, it says that this is a separate topic. There should be a law, but it's not there yet. Maybe we'll raise this topic sometime later. I have another question. I'd like to address it to Andriy, because it comes from our viewer, from Konstantin, to all participants, but I'd like to address it to Andriy. Please comment the concept Christian pacifist and Christian militarists from the Bible, from civil liberties. This is a wider question. Why not to Igor? Chaplain, of course. I'd like to involve Andriy into discussion. So, Andriy, Christian as pacifist or Christian as militarist from the standpoint of the Bible? This is a very important question, and Igor would be more competent here. But there is no concept of Christian militarist. In our theology, evangelical, Christian, Protestant, there are two theories, pacifism and just war. Theory of pacifism, briefly, condemns the war as fact. Christians should always find peaceful ways of resolution. Theory of just war says that in some cases war can be justified. Not even war, but, say, military methods of resolution. But there are certain limitations and concerns. War should be carried out with international law. You can defend yourself, but you cannot be aggressor. You have to use humane war methodology. War should be happening only between military persons. Civilians cannot be exploited, and there are many other rules. These are two positions. In Ukraine, we used to have tradition of pacifism because, of course, in Soviet Union, that was set in society. The church cannot be active in society. When independent Ukraine came, we did not discuss war in churches. We did not experience this importance when the war started. We had to review our position on the war, and I really like the quote from Gennady Makhnenko, who said, "I used to be pacifist until I saw Russian tanks at the threshold of the church." Pacifism exists in theory, not in practice. Thank you for your response. Well, unfortunately, our time of discussion is almost run out. I'd like to give you opportunity to address our viewers. Maybe a summary, resume, or there is a statement you'd like to make, something important for our viewers on the subject. Christian and society, Christian and citizen. 1 minute each, 2 sentences, several paragraphs. Vitaly and Igor here. Camera is there. I'd like to say that briefly. This is a question where we began. Can a good Christian be a bad citizen? My answer is not for sure. Because Christian is one who serves God with everything they have in every circumstance. They serve God anywhere they are, anywhere they can serve. So I invite everyone to be Christians everywhere, to take active civilian position in based on Christian values. I'll talk about my conviction, and I hope you are going to accept them. I'd like to tell you that you have to have God in your heart. You have to develop in a relationship with Him spiritually. And then you'll understand what's happening in your life. You'll understand why you should do certain things because God will direct your actions. Have your life in spirit, fighting the flesh that opposes spirit, and growing the fruit of the Spirit, joy, peace, patience. Then we might have no need for war or protest or protecting rights. Of course, these are idealistic positions, but if you're in the Spirit, you'll have peace and comfort in every action. Andriy, thank you, Vitaly. Andriy, I'd like to thank you, Vasyl, and everyone who organized this event. This is an important topic. But as we look at history of the Western countries, they were all built under pressure of civil society. They had reforms not because they had good politicians, but because they had society that demanded certain actions from the government. And documents as Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta were not coming from benevolent leaders, but from serious civil opinion that was based on opinion of the church. So we need to express our position. A small example: England as a bad a rock of Christianity someday, but you can be arrested for preaching the gospel on the street, and many of our colleagues, Christian lawyers in Britain, have many problems related to that because, they say, church was quiet. John Stott, in his book of New Problems of Modern Christians, he wrote that when these anti-Christian laws were passed by the parliament at the end of the last century, the church was trying to cleanse out the faith, but not participating in social and public life. And this former Christian country is now proclaimed as a country with threat to religious freedom. And our colleagues from Europe and Western countries are saying that in Ukraine you still have this window of opportunity. So now it's very important for the church to be active in society. Thank you, Andriy. Thank you, dear participants of this discussion, Vitaly and Igor. Thank you for invitation. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts. Very important and useful. I'm sure this was beneficial to all of us, dear viewers. Thank you for watching us and writing your comments and actively participating. My simple conclusion: I'm convinced that good Christian would be good citizen, and may God help us to practice our faith every day in our streets, in our work, in our family. God's peace be with you, and please propose next topics in the realm of church and government. We'll see you soon. God bless you.